Hello, YouTube. I would like to weigh in with my thoughts on the London riots that have been occurring over the past few days. I've read that riots of this sort have not occurred for several decades. I've heard they're similar to the riots that occurred in 2001 in the UK, as well as those that occurred in 1991 and 1981. And I wanted to address some of the rhetoric that, like in similar situations, is once again flowing around here. Just the kind of reaction, just the gut reaction, lack of critical analysis rhetoric that is all too common with people ranging from, right-wing constitutionalists to progressives, variety of individuals, jumping to all sorts of conclusions and painting these broad brushes without sufficient acknowledgement of the context, for one thing. And then, of course, there are those on the other side as well that are too quick to cheer them as something phenomenal without sufficiently considering what, in fact, is being gained, if anything. So, first I want to address those who are saying, these are just violent mobs of youth, just opportunistic thugs, etc. It's easy to sit on this moral high horse and claim that this is somehow thuggery, this is criminality, this is unjust behavior from mobs of just people who just for no particular reason are just immoral scum. It just so happens that these however many thousands of people are rioting are just in essence morally bankrupt scum. I mean, this is the assumption that is completely unwarranted in my view, that this just, things don't emerge in a vacuum. And when people claim that things emerge in a vacuum, they're just kind of looking for, people to criticize in essence. And, they're too attached to their own identification with the dominant culture to see reality. I don't know the precise demographics of the rioting, but they have occurred largely in highly poor areas, which they began in Tottenham, which is a highly poor area, or at least a well above the national average in terms of unemployment, poverty, things of that nature. And that makes sense from a rational standpoint as well, because well-to-do individuals, those who are well-off financially, and, I'm included in that bracket. Well, my parents are well-off financially. I'm personally not well-off financially. But yeah, I come from a well-off family, and, most people who are well-off don't want to risk, accidentally burning themselves or getting thrown in a jail cell just so they can have some fun. Typically, people who engage in these actions don't have a whole lot to lose. Typically, they have a lot of deep-seated resentment and frustration with the way of their society is run, with the power dynamics and economic and social dynamics that confine people and diminish their social standing and prevent them from being treated with dignity. And, the police, the institutional racism of the London police is clearly an issue. I saw this interview on the BBC where this grandfather was discussing the fact that his grandson could not count the number of times he's been searched by police, and the implication was that it is typically without pretext, and I've heard other people interviewed as well, from some of the areas that engage in the rioting, and apparently in poor areas it is relatively common for police to stop and search black people just for no reason whatsoever, just simply to stop, search, and harass them without any pretext. They say that, oh, you look like that person that was robbed. Yeah, I heard this 40-something-year-old individual speak about how he supposedly looked like this person who was robbed. He had nothing to do with the robbery. The police simply assumed that, I guess all black people look alike. And, when you're routinely stopped and searched for any reason by police, that can be highly demoralizing. That can be highly degrading to one's sense of self-worth. And, in addition to these recent incidents of police brutality, this alleged murder of a father of four by the police, as well as the harassment of a young girl, I believe, or a teenager, can certainly spark these deep-seated issues such as poverty and continual harassment by the police. So this notion that these were opportunistic thugs that simply decided to riot for fun does not seem warranted at all. This is a huge scale. It's spread to 50-plus areas as of yesterday, last I read. This doesn't merely happen, because people want to have some fun. It happens because people are enraged, and typically that kind of rage and that kind of explosive rage, that kind of risk-taking rage, comes as a consequence of unjust social, economic, and political dynamics, power dynamics that exist within a society. And, starting with Thatcher, who was prime minister, I believe, in the 80s, Britain has become increasingly socially stratified. That is, the rich-poor gap has increased. And then we see with this economic crisis, with the rising of the university tuition, the cuts to social services, etc., it's understandable that people are quite angry. I see this as motivated by at least some similar factors to what's occurring in, Greece and Spain and Chile and the variety of other countries to some extent, what occurred in Egypt and is occurring in Egypt and Yemen and etc., etc. Israel as well as having protests related to economic issues. So it's the economic issues as well as the social dynamics that are fueling this, and for people to just these moralizing liberals and conservatives alike are just like it's inhumane. These thugs aren't accomplishing anything. Violence is destructive and inherently wrong. They don't live it. They don't live the violence of these everyday lives of these individuals who are looted. Speaking of looting, these people are looting a few some corporations for a few days, sometimes small businesses, yes, that don't necessarily deserve it, but that's minuscule in terms of its negative impact compared to the fact that these poor people are being looted on a daily basis. And yes, there were a few. Of course, the media is going to exaggerate how many, but there were a few. Apparently, I don't know precisely how many, but there were some black people that were stopping and searching white people. And I don't agree in the sense that I'm not going to endorse it because all middle-class white people are not guilty of the economic oppression these people endure. But this was an act of, to some extent, revenge. They were saying, the white police stop and search us every day of our lives. Countless times they've done it without sufficient justification. So we're going to take this one day to loot as you loot us all the time and stop and search the people who at least are unknowingly complicit in the stopping and searching of them every day. So, systemic issues often get ignored in favor of these rare incidents. The systemic looting of these people's futures gets ignored on the basis of this 4-day looting of stores, and the systemic harassment by white police gets ignored in favor of the emphasis of the fact that, according to someone who lives near one of the rioting areas, maybe a few dozen whites were stopped and searched by blacks and had their cars hijacked. So this is a systemic problem. This is a reaction to a systemic problem. When things like this occur, they amount to reactions to systemic problems. They're not simply blind rage, quote unquote. Now, having said that, I do have some criticisms of these riots. I don't criticize the individuals engaging in them because, again, they are desperate, clearly, as a reaction to being treated unfairly. But I will say that I'm not going to praise these riots I'm not going to exaggerate the extent to which these are potentially positive. I'm not going to say that, wow, this is a revolution like Egypt. These individuals are, engaging in some wonderful act that's going to spawn some massive societal change. I view it as positive for the simple fact that these individuals are refusing to be subjugated. It gives me hope. But what little hope I have for the future and for the world is increased by the fact that these individuals said, you know what, we're not going to bow to the status quo of law and order, which is not law and order. Every time someone tells you that these people are creating chaos, they're obviously privileged white people like myself. Somehow I recognize this, even though I'm privileged and white. But most privileged and white people don't. I mean, to be white is to be privileged, but I mean privileged financially as well. Is they don't recognize. They say that these individuals. They say, they don't recognize the fact that everyday life is chaos. They don't recognize the fact that thousands of people die from unsafe working conditions every day. They don't recognize the fact that millions of Americans are on Prozac. They don't recognize the fact that the police are murdering poor black people. They don't recognize the fact that American soldiers and military officials are murdering Iraqi children en masse. They think that what they define as chaos is in fact just more chaos in their lives. But chaos and violence are an everyday reality for many individuals in our society. So when you get on your moral high horse and you condemn violence like it's, oh my God, they burned property, it's an atrocity. These people experience violence in their day-to-day lives. Due to the desperation and due to the violence that stems from their poor economic conditions and due to the violence inflicted upon them by the law enforcement and the government generally. But having said that, it wasn't targeted. It wasn't sufficiently targeted from what I've seen, these riots. This was not like an organized campaign against the primary forces like economic and governmental, like government institutions, the government itself, major financial institutions. They didn't target those very much. To the contrary, they ripped apart their own communities, and I don't blame them for it because it's hard to be rational when you're enraged and you have deep-seated issues with the way society functions and you're being oppressed by it. But I still think it's unfortunate that they burned their own communities in large part rather than really addressing the core of the problems. They could have marched on Parliament. That would have been more effective, I feel, than, burning the small shops in their own communities. Now, they did target police cars and police stations and, without, endorsing violence so that, Homeland Security doesn't, kick down my door. I will say that, at least that makes sense from a tactical standpoint. Because the police are responsible very directly for oppressing their communities. So I don't know to what real extent, when people just say this is chaotic and, yes, small businesses were targeted. Yes, it's unfortunate for those individuals, but it's really hard to tell to what extent these people were rational and to what extent they were acting quote-unquote blindly. I mean, they have targeted police cars and they have targeted media attempting to film them, corrupt media, etc., that demonize them. So, there seems to be some targeting going on, some tactical, rational targeting of the sources of their problems, and there also seems to be some quote-unquote blind rage, which is understandable given, again, their economic conditions. And, furthermore, well, you know what? Stay tuned for part 2. This video is almost over. Thanks for listening. Watch part 2.